G'day everyone. Welcome to another edition of Bookish and Base with myself, Dan Ryan, Executive Director of the NatCon Australia, and Jordan Knight, who is also Director of NatCon and runs Migration Watch. How are things, Jordan?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, really well, really well. We just had, as you know, CPAC, the big conservative conference here in Brisbane last week. So that was good to catch up with a lot of people. The content was not, it was all right. The main value of those things is just to network with different people that you sort of know and half know, and so yeah, it was good. Actually, I met Catherine Deves, who I think you were on a show recently. I hadn't met her briefly, but I had a bit more of a chat, so that was interesting.
Yeah, nice. What would you say there was any NatCon themes in the CPAC this year?
Well, I was on the stage. Like, they gave me a run on the panel that was to talk about the Queensland election and a few other things. But there was a little bit of the former British Prime Minister was there, and she actually was asked a couple of immigration questions, and she gave some fairly forthright answers. I mean, she basically said there should be not just a reduction in numbers, but be much more discerning about the type of people we let in. I mean, that's progress, I suppose. There was a Daniel Wild from the IPA, as you probably know, they're now beating the drum a little bit more on immigration. But apart from that, not really. Nothing on trade, nothing on well, there was a very big section on the October 7th commemoration, anniversary, and there was a lot of heartfelt sort of stories related to that, but nothing really about our foreign policy in general, and where we might get involved and not get involved. So yeah, not really. I mean, I just don't think we'll get the NatCon stuff, to be honest, but it's good that they're giving us getting involved, and I certainly got to know many more of them, like I said. But yeah, what do you think? You've been out and about as well in different ways, connecting.
Yeah. I didn't get up to CPAC. I actually forgot it was on, and for that exact reason as well. I mean, it's pretty, I mean, talking to people who go there, they all sort of recognize that conservatism is a bit boring and things like that in its current stage, and they never really sort of conceptualize what comes after, right? Like, if it's a bit boring, then what can you sort of do that makes it more interesting to you, right? Like, what matters to you, like immigration and trade, for example. So maybe there's like a space to discuss those things, but it's just this sclerotic thing where it's just not moving, and the ideas don't really change every year. Anyway,
no, it's a creature of the 80s, the sort of Reagan, Thatcher era CPAC, and it was probably good for its time, and it is fairly big tent. I mean, that's its one advantage. It allows people from across the board, but it's it's targeted at a baby boom audience predominantly. They get the things that worked in the 80s gets the most cheers. And yeah, I wouldn't say there was really anything that innovative. I don't want to be too disparaging, because look, until you organize a conference, you don't get to criticize it really, in a way, but because it's a major logistical feat. But yeah, I just don't think it was. It's not where you go to for the most cutting edge and interesting ideas, and where the new right is headed in Australia or elsewhere.
Was there a new right contingent that without naming names?
There was actually, again, some of the young people. They knew about us, they knew about you, and we had some, frank conversations on the sidelines, and that's the advantage of these things. It does bring together a bunch of people that you do get to sort of know better. And look, there were people, Twitter anons that that revealed themselves to me, and so I won't disclose their names, but they had some they had some criticisms about normie conservatism, as you'd expect, and they they're on the same page as us. It's just that they think it's too risky.
I wonder if it's a generational thing, and the problem is that the older generations, the much older generations, are the ones with all the donor cash sort of thing, and so the movement kind of goes wherever they are, and they're still sort of stuck in the past. Do you reckon that's a fair assumption?
I think that's a large part of it. There's baby boomer conservatism, or whatever you want to call it, but they also want to be on the winning team, and the winning team has been a particular thing for a variety of for a number of years, and so they sort of can't shake it. But I do think, well, I have thought about this, right? Like Trump is not is I think is he a baby boomer, or he's close? He's either a baby boomer or he's older than a baby boomer, but he gets the new right. I think JD is younger, so comes from a different generation. He gets the new right, but there isn't. So it's not. I guess it's not purely a generational thing. It's not like, let's not play generational identity politics. You can actually think differently just because you belong to a particular generation. I remember this line. I read somewhere. I think it was Jonah Goldberg or somebody. He's like, the greatest generation. Yeah, not all of them were great guys. Not all of the hippie generation were hippies. So it's sort of a little bit of a tag that's given to thing as a whole, and shouldn't paint it with the same brush. But you've been doing different things. What have you were on Catherine Deves, and then you were on
doing a few interviews, Catherine Deves, like we mentioned, and Daisy Cousins and stuff like that. So it's becoming more frequent now, and I think immigration, like the topic of immigration, is just becoming so much more mainstream that I literally remember like a year or 2 years ago, even mentioning the word immigration, it was very much like the room would go quiet sort of thing. And now people have completely politicized and radicalized.
Yeah, it gets the party going.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the parties we go to, no, it's been good. It is spinning up a bit. I've got to start putting more effort into sort of the media. I went to the Quillette social a couple of years ago. A similar story to maybe CPAC. I mean, obviously different areas, but I mean, lots of just interesting sort of conversations that sort of may not happen so much on the main stage, but all the very interesting conversations are kind of happening down in the hallways and at the bar and stuff like that. So something is kind of bubbling up and brewing. But no, it was a fantastic night. I met a lot of smart people. So
yeah, I was going to try and head down, but you can't go everywhere. We're both going to be at the ARC thing in Sydney next. It's a week and a half's time, right? So
I don't know. We probably shouldn't dox when it is, but
yes. Okay, yeah. But anyway, what do you make the Quillette people? Because I put them. They're different to the CPAC guys, and I'm very charitable to all, malice towards none. I have, obviously they have particular things that they focus on. Are they on? Do they get the NatCon thing? Does Claire Lehman? Get it?
I know they're big fans of JD Vance, and I think JD Vance has even written for Quillette. So I think in that capacity, yes. It's kind of hard to nail down, and I think they do that on purpose. They make it a bit difficult to nail down. They would absolutely not call themselves like a NatCon magazine, but to their credit, they would be one of the few places that would very quickly, entertain articles or publish articles on that subject. So they're at least more open to it than, say, the Australian or something like that.
They've published Sharon Hazoni, they've published JD Vance. They're a bit more. They're certainly open. I think that Claire Lehman has a journalist's knack or an editor's knack for knowing what it might be interesting, which is outside the bounds of the usual kind of mainstream. And it's difficult. Sometimes gets her into trouble because she takes some positions that some people don't like and others don't like. But generally, I think they're certainly probably there's probably one of the more influential new media organizations that have come from Australia in recent years, right?
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And what I do like about them is that they add a sort of aesthetic sort of, element to it, right? And like, the nice cocktail parties that, it's not this stuffy political same people sort of thing. There's actually something cool about it, which is nice and is desperately needed in Australia. But you were also you're in the Spectator as well recently, is that correct?
I was, yes. That was on trade. Jim Chalmers, Australian Treasurer, headed to Beijing, came back and announced again that the agreement has been stabilized, which is the buzzword that they like to use. And, they're fretting about whether lobsters and wine and this, that, and the other can be imported because China's been putting some blocks on that. But it's sort of, the point I was making in the article is, look, the main issue with China trade is that 100% manufactured goods come in from China duty-free. So all this business about, building a manufacturing industry in Australia, which is in, NatCon themes, things that JD Vance have gone on about, is not going to happen. Let's be real, guys. It's simply not going to happen as long as that is allowed. And so in the same way that you need borders on immigration, and you need to have a sort of base, you need to preserve your culture to a certain extent, or at least not be careless about who comes in and dilute it with massive numbers in a short period of time. You also need to have a base manufacturing industry to preserve your kind of national sovereignty. And the 80s guys, on the right and the left, I mean, the whole Hawke Coward heating consensus simply can't get the head around that. But in the US, Trump the other day was in Michigan and he literally said that tariffs are the greatest thing ever invented. And if you try, imagine Peter Costello saying that, his brain would his hair would stand on end. But yeah, that there's definitely movement there, and eventually the penalty will drop over here too.
Is there any movement whatsoever in Australia towards tariffs, like at all, aside from yourself?
They don't get it. I mean, they simply don't get this. The DFAT, and as you know, I was on the Australian China Council for a while. I know some of the DFAT guys pretty well. Because they came of age in the 80s, their whole origin story is opening up the Australian economy, and so they simply haven't really thought it through. I mean, literally, it's funny. I interviewed John Lee, who used to be Julie Bishop's foreign policy advisor, and is a mate I've known for ages. But when I was researching that, the Australian-China Free Trade Agreement that Tony Abbott's government signed, it literally was signed the same day that Trump came down the escalators in New York. So it's just literally it was sort of out of date the day it was signed, or at least, because he came in with a very different agenda to reindustrialize the West and put tariffs on China. And so, it's I think, like all these things, it's nice that you start, making an argument that others haven't got, but it's also a bit frustrating because it's like, come on, guys. It's like, this is, you look around, like they're not just sort of doing it, I don't know. They dismiss Trump comes through with those lines and they're sort of deliberately provocative. But the US has changed dramatically on they have tariffs on China trade. We have zero. And so the idea of in the article was like, the point is not that you should stabilize China trade. That word is meaningless. The point really is like, where are you going? It's no point being stable, but the more important point is, we need to have some sort of base manufacturing industry here. Anyway, check it out. It's on the Spectator. I think the title to it is Trade on Autopilot or something along those lines.
Just one more question on that. Do you think it's an inevitability that Australia will sort of follow America's lead should Trump get in and double down on tariffs? And do you think Australia will follow that lead?
I think so, because America, well, even if they don't, I mean, Biden and Harris have maintained Trump's original tariffs. So I just think if Trump gets in and he's proposing to raise across the board tariffs up to 60% and over 100% on Chinese goods. So that will be a big change, and we will be forced to America is still so dominant intellectually, culturally, that they will be forced to have a reassessment here. But we haven't yet. There's no signs of it. I can't see anyone outside of Jared Rennick and perhaps Antic, although he hasn't actually talked about that so much. And he comes from Adelaide. It's used to be the home of the car industry in Australia. So yeah. No, we'll see, man. We'll see. I think eventually, just the reality will set in, and there will be a need to change. But it's almost as they haven't thought about trade for so long. They've sort of they've lost the skill to think about it. Like,
no, that's true. I mean, the word autopilot was the word to use, right? Because nobody thinks about trade because they're just like, yep, we figured it out. It's good. No need to change, which is obviously the single worst thing that you can do.
Yeah.
First step towards atrophying.
Yeah, you've got to recognize you have a problem before you're relying on this like an alcoholic, all these cheap goods, and you don't actually forget the ability how to do it yourself. So yeah, that was I was in there, and I spoke with, as I mentioned, John Lee about it. He's actually an advisor now to the Department of Defense in the US. So he certainly tapped in, and I think he was on Konstantin Kissin's trigonometry a while back too. So he's making a name for himself. I mean, I disagree with him on different things, but he's a decent dude, and we always have a good discussion. So that's on the NatCon website if anyone wants to check that out. So
cool. So speaking of changing economical headwinds as well. So the assistant, what are you reckon about the segue? The assistant minister for immigration came out and said that immigration has marginal economic benefits for Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah. So he gave a speech. This is what's his name? Matthew. What is this?
Thistlethwaite or something like that?
Yeah, hard to say fast. But it's gave a speech at the Sydney Institute, and basically admitted that migration has not a net economic benefit to the locals. So he's sounding like Jordan Knight, which is but
I don't know about that. Yeah.
But then didn't actually take. He recognized there is a problem, but then he didn't. His proposed solution was pretty underwhelming, right? I mean, what did you read the speech? I mean,
yeah. Well, I didn't read the speech. I just read the article, but two things stood out to me. The first was that he admitted that immigration is straining social cohesion, right? And it sounds like he sort of admits that, not just in like a cultural sense of like we're bringing people in from different cultures and that's sort of straining things, but like in an economic sense where you're competing with migrants now for wages and for housing and for a spot on the hospital wait list or something, right? And that's just going to fragment and isolate people. So, which I think is an amazing admission from the government to say that part of the reason that life today, modern life, is so isolated and fragmented and community is weak is largely because of immigration, which is, the problem with these things is that these politicians diagnose the problem and then do the absolute minimum to do anything about it. They're like, yeah, this is a huge fundamental problem that affects every single Australian, but we're not going to do anything about it.
Well, they love to talk tough. I mean, and that it has been a theme, not only here, but actually in Australia, we've talked tough on illegal immigration, but we haven't really talked tough on, compared to say the Europeans, even like 10, 15 years ago, at one stage there, you had, Nicolas Sarkozy, the former French president, say multiculturalism's dead, and Angela Merkel said the same thing, and in German, obviously, and then David Cameron said the same thing, but there wasn't really any sort of change at all. And there certainly wasn't any real reduction in numbers. So skeptical right? They may say things, and then what are they actually going to do? Because the numbers, and you've been following this more closely than probably anyone, but they talk tough at the beginning of the year of introducing student caps and reducing numbers, but we're still getting, waves and waves of people. The inflows have not slowed down since the beginning of this year, right?
Yeah, I think there's politics. It's an indictment on politics today, where there's like massive ocean of separation between what government is saying and political outcomes. And like, yeah, immigration is the best example of that. They said they were going to cut immigration. Immigration went up, right? Like it's laughable. And that article as well, you know, you mentioned that they didn't really propose any strong solutions. They diagnosed the problem, but they didn't say what they were going to do about it. They kind of gave a hint, I think, of what they wanted to do about it. And it's the same old boring line of, it's not our fault, it was the coalition's fault for breaking the immigration system, whatever that means. Meaningless statement, like absolutely void of content. And so what they're going to say, what they're saying is that, you know, the coalition has turned this immigration system into like this permanent temporary underclass. And so that hints to me, it's like, okay, so you've recognized this issue. They've said all the populist things about immigration, channeling popular sentiment. And then their solution is to give, 3 million temporary migrants permanent residency. And they've signaled stuff like that before, that they want to like channel that as if that's the solution. So it's just like, no, dude, like they've obviously game theoried this, and they're like, okay, people are angry about immigration. Let's start sort of like channeling that. Let's start talking about that. But then the solution will be this insane radical thing that absolutely nobody wants and completely hoodwink.
Or move them to the regions. You know, we just need to encourage them to move out of the cities, because Melbourne and Sydney have them all. Never going to work. Never going to fly. I've said this a million times before. You know, do they really want them in the regions?
No, they're like the most nationalist people out there.
I think since last time we spoke, I actually did that interview with Mark Krikorian, who's you introduced me to, the guy from the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. And, you know, this was just a little bit after the whole they're eating cats line from Trump about Springfield, Ohio, where, you know, a whole bunch of Haitians have been dumped on this poor town and and caused all sorts of social problems, and they probably are eating cats, I reckon. Anyway, but apart from that, they're all causing all sorts of you know, strains on the society. And yeah, and so I mean, it's a bit of a reality check as to how insane the US is on illegal immigration compared to us. At the very least, you know, be grateful for small mercies that we've got at least illegal immigration by boat much more under control. I mean, there's illegal immigration in other ways that comes into Australia, and we've got a de facto, as you know, system of people working the universities and elsewhere in order to get in. So we're at least more insane on legal immigration, but at least when you have it spelled out to him by him how insane the US is on illegal immigration, just go, whoa, you know, that's the next level.
It is next level, and they are in a and it's no wonder that Trump rallies are now calling for mass deportations. Like, it's literally gotten to that point. I will say though, we don't have an illegal immigration problem, I think, largely because we legalized a lot of the reasons that America has an illegal immigration problem. Like, for example, you know, Mark Krikorian in the interview, he mentions that a lot of it stems back from when farmers would, in Texas and whatnot, were just sort of calling for immigration because they wanted cheap farm workers. And Australia has the Pacific Mobility Scheme and these farm schemes. And you see issues in those towns, in those areas, similar to what's happened in, you know, Ohio and Charleroi and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if you saw, I think it was like early last year or something, there was a rape case committed by one of the farm workers, like the temporary farm workers, against a local. And people are saying that the town has been completely swamped, and there was fights in the street, drunkenness, all sorts of things.
Which town in Australia was that in?
I can't remember. It was like Warrawee or something like that comes to my mind. Is Northern New South Wales? I'm pretty sure. We'll have to sort of drop it in the comments or something like that. But yeah, it was in news.com and everything. It wasn't a hidden story. And there was just the townspeople. It would be worth getting up there one day, because the townspeople are just saying they're being completely overrun. And I've literally had messages from people in Queensland as well, saying that there are multiple towns in Queensland where it's a similar story. Brought people in, to work as farm workers, and it's completely changed the town. So yeah, it's something to look into, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's one of these things which no one talks about, and then suddenly it's front page news, and people are, because it's something provocative said or something terrible does happen. Yeah, I mean, it's weird psychology with this stuff, right? There's just pure, they need people, they want cheap farm labor. They have some genuine needs, but it's not, the solution is not importing, these people to do jobs that Australians actually should do and be forced to do, frankly. And there are consequences. It's with immigration and a whole lot of other stuff. It's always like you get these liabilities which build up, which are never truly factored in from an accounting perspective in the first place.
Yeah.
You take the little gain here, but you don't properly realize the liability. So yeah, it's crazy. I must admit, like the thing that also came through with Mark Krikorian, and again, check it out, anyone watching. It's a worthwhile interview.
Yeah, it's great.
It's really useful as someone like that who's been in the trenches for so long, focusing on all of the detail and the loopholes and everything else, because immigration tends to be discussed as this like emotionally laden abstraction. You're either for it or you're against it. You're for it or against it. And we don't talk about that in barely any other policy in any other ways. You can be for tax, but you want to be like, well, which tax and what tax and how much? But that's not how people really talk. Most people would not know the visa categories. Most people would not, and it is confusing. Most people wouldn't really. I mean, it's become so big in recent times. People are much more focused on it, but no one was probably really aware of what the true, net migration rate was, or where people are from, the details of it. It was just like, are you for immigration or are you against it? Well, there's so many loopholes which people work, and it's just great, Mark Krikorian sort of pulling them apart piece by piece.
Well, yeah, I actually think that's done on purpose. I mean, nobody really talks about the details because they know that if people knew the details of immigration, they're mostly anti-immigration. I mean, that's all Migration Watch does, is just post the statistics from the ABS, which is publicly available. And people are like, wow, that's amazing. Like, it's like, no, dude, it's literally just, anyway. I think the governments, I think the media kind of obfuscates, plays dumb on these things because it's an inherently sort of bad sort of, and they leverage that people will just get overly emotional about it and, go 0 to 100, red and blue sort of thing. But you do have to be boring. Yeah.
One thing I didn't realize is that, and because there are rorts throughout this thing, and sometimes if you focus on them, you're not quite aware. And this is probably an obvious one you know already, but I saw an interview recently in the UK where there was I think it was a Reform MP asking questions of the minister in London, and he was saying, well, why, if an Albanian, I think he was saying, if an Albanian can just fly to London for Ryanair for $27, why do they have to come via boat? Albanians are coming via boat, but they could fly. And the reason is, he suggested, is if you come by boat, you don't have to have your passport. So then you can apply for asylum in the UK and you're in the system. Whereas if you jump on a plane from Albania, you have to present your documents as you arrive, and therefore they know details about you, and so it doesn't make your claim. It's harder for you to make out your claim. I can see the logic of that, but it just never fully occurred to me how you could work the system in that way. But yeah, it must be an obvious one.
It is a absolute Pandora's box, immigration. I mean, literally, the more that you sort of dig into it, the more that sort of information that presents itself, and it's so utterly demoralizing and depressing. I mean, Mark Krikorian, he's great because he has a sort of humor about it.
He does.
Which you can only have, like, yeah. But
I
was going to say as well.
Sorry, go on, mate. Yeah.
I was just going to say quickly on that. I mean, the information gap thing. Just recently, somebody sent me an article where in the UK, where they're now picking the Conservative leader. I was about to say Rennick. I can't remember his name. Jenrick, I think. Generally,
yeah.
something like that. He's sort of the tougher on immigration guy, and the Center for Policy Studies, I think it's called, a think tank, has just done this excellent report on immigration. And one of what they're suggesting is basically a migration booklet, which delivers basically, up to date, live, consistent immigration facts and details that are just publicly available. And I think that would, simply be the best thing that you could do for immigration restrictionism in the country, is just making it very easily accessible and known. And we Migration Watch put forward a submission to the federal parliament's, the Senate's housing inquiry, housing affordability inquiry, and in that we sort of said one of our suggestions was live, up-to-date data on the amount of migrants that are coming in, breaking it down into weekly if possible. And that would, I think the fastest way to radicalize anybody is just to tell them how many migrants are coming in a week, to be honest. But,
yeah, I just think, well, lots to say, but there's the simplest solution is just a dramatic restriction in numbers for a period of time, right? I mean, that way there's such an asymmetry, right? Because the people who want to get in have so much more of a focus and energy and in working out their way through the system, whereas if you're already, if you're Australian, you don't kind of give, on a day-to-day basis, you're not thinking about how to plug the gaps because you've got other things to do. It's not in your, you may generally be thinking about immigration, but don't have that sort of drive, because that's not what you don't need to. So yeah, no, I think that's part of the issue. You were saying in terms of the rorts, there was a good article I think you referred me to in the Australian Financial Review, where you talk with Phil Honeywood, chief executive of Peak Group of the International Education Association, was sort of admitting a lot of what you've been claiming all along, right?
Well, yeah, he's got this quote. First of all, the article sort of says that, unsurprisingly, that Labor sets this pathetically weak student cap for next year, which is 300,000, nearly 300,000, which is still insanely high. Like, it should be cutting it by 90%. And then, surprise, surprise, they won't even reach that cap, which is, it's just one demoralizing factor after another. But in that, they're so blatant about it now. There's this guy, Phil Honeywood, chief executive of International Education Association. He sort of says, that part of the problem with these proposed caps is that, it will disproportionately affect respectable universities, and then, students who may be affected by these caps will just rush into, vet colleges and stuff like that. I think that's what it was saying. And, it just goes to show, it's like, well, hold on. I thought they were coming here for a higher education experience. Are you now suggesting that they're just coming here for another purpose, like to work, perhaps? Like, which right. I think is, Matt Barry made the point that if students are literally coming here to work primarily rather than study, that is in essence visa fraud. Like, you're lying about your intention to come to Australia. And if you're committing visa fraud, then you shouldn't be allowed to come. You shouldn't be here. Like, I think it's a salient point. But
yeah, no, the whole thing is baked in, right? Because I think in that Matt Barry speech, this is the CEO of Freelancer who gave a speech in Brisbane, actually, a month and a bit ago. He said that it's completely unrealistic, the amounts of money that they say you require to live in Australia as a student, and to pay rent and everything else. And so necessarily they have to be working here, and then they're predominantly working here, and the education is just an add-on. And again, with the increasing numbers of universities offering online courses, I mean, why you're here, you're watching an online course, and you're working full-time driving Uber and everything else. I mean, what are you? Are you really a student, or you're a temporary worker here? It happens to do a part-time course online, which could be anywhere. Another rort that someone mentioned to me recently was many people from different countries have dual passports, right? So they can arrive here on one passport, say from China, and so they have what was the deal? And they basically use that as the basis for being resident here. and then they fly back on their old passport. So in theory, that they're still. Well, anyway, it's getting into the weeds a fair bit, but there's so many different ways of sort of manipulating the system. It sort of boggles the mind.
Yeah. You know, I'm trying to sort of seed this language into the internet, but you know, it really is. The more you look into it, so much of Australia's migration system, especially with international students, is just open borders with, you know, a few extra steps. Like I said before, you've kind of just legalized open borders. Like, I don't know if you saw recently, the recent education data shows that I think like close to 400,000 of Australia's international students, which number, you know, roughly between 800,000 and 1 million, which is another problem. We don't actually fully know. Like, the data is always different. But at the moment, close to 400,000 aren't even enrolled in higher education. They're in these vet courses or like English language skills, providing zero value to us and to them and to their countries that they're from. And these colleges are so shoddy, so dodgy. We've had problems with them for years. I mean, the simple solution would just be to shut them down and just remove the visa category for vet. It's insane.
There's so many people that rely on this one way or another. I was just saying, so you also had an article in the Spectator on, talking about the October 7 commemorations and the protests by Hezbollah supporters and others in relation to that. And it's really obviously a sensitive issue, but I think you were making the point that, well, what was the point you're making? You're basically saying it's not the conflict, it's how do we import these conflicts here, and no one knows what to do about it.
Well, that's right. I sort of tried to draw the parallel between, because in the same week that the guys that you had on, who basically the police minister and assistant chief,
right.
in the same week that they. Sorry,
I just for viewers, I had a Mark Scully, who was the former Minister for Police during the Cronulla riots, and he's written a book, and I interviewed him on the Cronulla riots, The Untold Story. So he goes into that in detail. It's worth reading the book and or watching the video if you want about how crazy that time kind of was. But you were saying with the current controversy that.
That nothing was really learned between, like, in the same week that their book was released and that they were doing this sort of media run, we had excessive, you know, overdone protests in Melbourne and Sydney, pro-Palestine, and there were Hezbollah flags flying, right? And so the you know, the kind of learning was from the Cronulla riots, was that there was no learning. You know, one of the scariest, most striking things that I think the minister at the time said was that, you know, that after the 2 days of riots and inter-ethnic violence, they kind of just stopped. It didn't stop because, you know, the government and the police fixed the problems that were causing it. They very simply just decided to stop rioting. So that tension is still there. That capacity for rioting is still there. Sure, they cracked down, but you know, the core problem never really went away. The core problem being that there's basically, you know, enclaves of a sort within Australia that would sort of do this stuff, that would fly Hezbollah flags. And in the 25 years now, something, 20 years since, nearly 20 years, nothing's really sort of changed from what I've seen. And it's I don't know, where nobody has really said, you know, Dutton's come out, Labor has come out, they've said, well, obviously flying Hezbollah flags is bad. They should be deported if they're on temporary visas or something like that. Like, tough language again. But it's like, what about the Hezbollah supporters, or what about any other sort of negative supporters that we weren't flying the flags in the country? Like, do we know anything about it?
They never answer that question because there's no easy answer. I mean, that Mark Scully, I thought he was a good guy. In New South Wales, there was a certain frankness, I think, at least in cracking down on Middle Eastern crime in the late 90s, early 2000s, under a Labor government, admittedly, in New South Wales. And you had people like Margaret Cunneen, the QC, taking action against the horrible, rapes and things that had occurred there. And I kind of wonder whether, and I put this to him, whether we haven't experienced what went on in the UK with the notorious grooming gangs and stuff. At least it seems, because there was more frank, hardcore policing. But we also had a different.
That's true, yeah.
We had a Lebanese. Well, we had a problem, as he says, from a particular part of Lebanon that came in the late 70s and are still causing trouble and had a particular culture. And he was quite sort of romantic about the immigration program in generally, which I can have my questions about. But we hadn't. I guess we haven't quite had the same type of influx as the UK had, and I also think probably weren't as un-PC and frank about some of the problems early on. So to his credit, he was involved there in doing that.
I think they were good. Yeah, they were very frank about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right, like Hezbollah and all these protests. And there's a lot of, I find in the mainstream press, the Australian, which is all very sad about October 7, and quite rightly, it was, obviously barbaric, but they're never really, like, they try and pretend it's a problem with the universities and what they're teaching. Yeah, maybe a bit, but not the main cause. And, there's never really any solutions given.
That's true. I really liked what Mark Krikorian said, which is, the best way to do immigration is low and slow, so that they can come in and they can sort of learn and understand the ways that things are done sort of here. And sort of, this is kind of the point I was making in the Spectator article, is that there's been absolutely no attempt at assimilation. And with the numbers, it's a who game, but it's also like a how many. And the sheer amount of numbers that you're bringing in, you are actively, against, working against any idea of assimilation with these numbers at the moment. There is no effort made to disperse these people into the community so that they can sort of acclimatize to the Australian way of doing things. And that has serious negative effects, as we continually see. And you're right, the Australian and elsewhere seldom admit it.
Rarely focus on that in a clear way and recognize it's not just values or teaching values. It's not. Yes, it's very sad. It's all terrible. But what are you actually going to do? If the ethnic conflict wasn't being played out here, it would be less of an issue for Australia. We would be very have strong opinions about what's going on in that part of the world, but it wouldn't be as an immediate problem. And actually, I guess in a sort of related note, I did. And this is going to seem probably a little bit obscure, but there was a book launched recently for a guy who wrote a book on sectarian conflict between the Irish and the Protestants back in early Australia. And there was a particular incident where a nun escaped and both of the different parties were sort of using her as a pawn. And I just thought, I offered to do the sort of book launch, because it just sort of illustrates that even back then you had a certain level of sort of difficulty with people who came from slightly different background, even though they look the same, talk the same, basically belong to the same broad religion, are just different, denominations of it.
No. Now look, we've got Catholics in Parliament. It's terrible.
We all came sort of good in the end, and we've let bygones be bygones to a certain extent. But there was a challenge to it for a long period of time in Australian history. But that is of a different nature and type to what we have, challenges we're facing now. And
Yes. No, indeed. I mean, those are almost like, millennia long sort of problems that even the host nations that they came from were dealing with, whereas what we're sort of facing is completely new and alien and has never really had a historical precedent at this type or level. And, the argument I am terrified about is that, this classical liberal, social democratic framework that we're kind of living in now simply does not have an answer to how to address that, right? These problems will likely get worse in terms of scales, simply because of the amount of immigration that we have, and yet we just do not have a framework or tool set. If anything, we're going the other way. We're giving up our capacity to actually handle these things because we can't have the frank conversations, because of so-called PC things. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not even like you can have as many frank conversations too if you like, but unless you're actually going to stop, do things. Again, I think there's an editorial page sort of syndrome where they think, if we just say something really strong, or yes, you've nailed it, Paul Murray, or you've nailed it, Paul Kelly, or God knows what. Recognize the problem. Yeah, great. So how, pray tell, did this situation arrive? I mean, you were writing all this time, Paul. You didn't mention it beforehand, or and so and they just think, in a way, they think everything's ideological when actually it's sort of, there's these god awful ethnic long-standing disputes that exist all over the planet, and you're not gonna, giving them a book on classical liberalism is sort of not gonna, or it's just not. It's not going to be the cure. Regretfully to say. So yeah. What else we got? So yeah, I will see you in Sydney before too long. We will we'll certainly have to check in again before that happens. I mean, there's a few other things we mentioned. I think since we last spoke, Australia's population exceeded 27 million. That all sort of happens in a flash.
It just feels like it's getting faster and faster. We're actually like 27.2 or something like that now. Like it's
the time flies. Like I said, you open
and it is. We asked the question, is like, has your life improved because of this? And literally everybody said no. Like, I think it's no coincidence that life has become arguably, more miserable as the immigration kind of line has times 10, and life in Australia has become harder. And there's a direct correlation between that. But anyway,
I do think too that how it's always say you import the people that they're importing children that they didn't have, or that's a line that is used. There really is, I think, just I sense chatting to some of the older baby boomer types, they kind of do at one level think, oh, well, who's going to look after us in our old age? And I think they're like, well, we need someone, and I haven't got the kids or whatever, enough kids to do it. So therefore, we need these, and I think that is sort of maybe it's been mentioned, but I think it's an emotional driver of this at some level too, as well as the sort of fact that it makes your houses go up and all the rest of it.
That's a very good point, actually. A lot of the comments, I was just thinking the other day, a lot of the negative comments that I get online are largely from baby boomers or older generations. And you're probably right. It's probably a deep sensed fear of, well, young people aren't going to look after us. I think
that might be part of it, actually. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of psychological drives, and there's some of it is,
Well, I would look after old people. I would. I mean, if I got paid $200 an hour, I would look after old people. I want to flag that immediately.
Yeah.
And they've got all the money, so anyway.
Well, not all of them, but I agree that it's disproportionately, in that part of the world. So we've also potentially got there's a Queensland election, which is there's no control over immigration or pretty much any NatCon issues, because they tend to be national issues rather than state issues. But they were, a couple of months back, there was actually talk from both the Lord Mayor of Brisbane and the state, the Labor Premier about immigration. But again, it's just them
coincidentally both before their own elections.
Yeah, signaling this, but it's almost ridiculous them talking about, because neither of them have any real control. So what are they going to do? And what else we got?
Well, so the election, federal election, from what I understand, will be May. Because the budget is getting handed down in March or something like that. So it's looking like the May election is
going. So there will be movement as that continues. I'm genuinely curious as to whether, to what extent immigration levels. Oh, geez. I could hope for trade, but it's never going to happen, or even like foreign policy. But at least immigration. Do you think there's really any likelihood that, say, either two parties will go beyond what they've said now in relation to?
Oh no, no. The Liberal Party they've spent a couple of weeks put a few policy researchers towards what their immigration policy should be. They've really optimized and nailed down what is the most exciting and damaging and dangerous thing that they can say that sounds like they're going to do a lot that will actively do nothing. Like, for example, right. They're stopping foreign buyers for 2 years. What is that going to achieve? Or international students cutting by 25%. I mean, you should be cutting it by 98%, right? When Dutton says it, the consultants, you got to hand it to them. The consultants know what will fly. There's absolutely no substance to it whatsoever. When Dutton will say it, people say Dutton's going to do something about immigration. Great, that's it, and then not think much further about it. So, to the extent that immigration will play a part in the next election, I think it will just be grifted basically by,
really,
in that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's live in hope. Maybe the US election does something and migration.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean,
ABC investigation, and you'll bring it to the forefront. Yeah.
Well, that's the entire point of Migration Watch Australia. I shouldn't be cynical because the entire point of Migration Watch Australia, and I do think it does have, if done right, it has the capacity to do this, is to really force the issue closer into the mainstream and force parties to sort of take stronger stances. So, depending on resourcing and depending on how the cards land, sort of thing. And
we'll change. We'll bring change. Don't worry, man. In due course, just when it will come. I think there'll be some odd results this federal election among different demographic groups and age groups, and that will, I think, spark new conversations.
You'd hope so. Well, I mean, every Libs aligned guy that I speak to, I mean, they're all extremely black-pilled, and they all think that nobody's going to really vote for the Libs and nobody's really going to vote for Labor. They're all going to vote for just independence or legalize cannabis or some shit. Like, it's just going to be a donkey vote election. Yeah.
Really, yeah. Who knows? Yeah, all right. Well, on a positive note, man, we might wrap it up, but we'll check in again earlier than we did, sooner than we did after last conversation, and we'll get into it. Good to speak.
Sounds good. Cheers.
See you, man.